This is Mike Tyson. November 2009. Tokyo, 11:47 p.m. Shibuya District. The baddest man on the planet. Broken. Sitting on a curb. Back against a cold concrete wall. Hands covering his face. Crying. Not the crying you do when you lose a fight. The crying you do when you lose yourself. The neon signs above him flash pink and blue, casting electric shadows across his tattooed face. A crowd of maybe 30 people flows past him like water round a stone. Salarymen stumbling home drunk. Young couples laughing. Teenagers glued to their phones. And nobody stops. Nobody asks if he's okay. One elderly woman pauses, sees his size, his face tattoo, the tears streaming down his cheeks, and keeps walking. Mike Tyson, in a city of 13 million people, surrounded by life, by light, by movement, is completely invisible, and in that invisibility, something inside him shatters. But to understand this moment, you have to go back to 3 months earlier. Back to the day Mike Tyson's world ended. May 26, 2009. Phoenix, Arizona. Mike Tyson's 4-year-old daughter Exodus was playing at home. Her 7-year-old brother, Miguel, found her, her neck caught in a treadmill cord. A terrible, random, senseless accident. She was rushed to the hospital. Tyson was in Las Vegas. He got the call, jumped on the first flight, ran through hospital hallways desperate, bargaining with God. Let her live, please. I'll do anything. She was on life support. He held her small hand in his massive one, told her to come back. But she didn't. She died the next day, May 27, 2009. And something in Mike Tyson died with her. Not the fighter. Something deeper. The part of him that still believed he could protect the people he loved. That part died in that hospital room. You see, Mike Tyson had been abandoned his entire life. His father left when he was 2. His mother, drowning in poverty and addiction, loved him but couldn't protect him. The streets of Brownsville, Brooklyn, raised Mike. By 10, he knew what it felt like to be robbed, beaten, thrown away. He learned early. The world doesn't care about scared little boys. So Mike learned to fight. Survival fighting. The kind where you hit first because if you don't go home. By 13, Mike had been arrested dozens of times. He was headed nowhere good. And then came Cus D'Amato, the old boxing trainer with the weathered face, and the house upstate in Catskill. Bobby Stewart, a counselor at juvenile detention, introduced Mike to Cus, and Cus saw it. Saw a boy drowning, and offered him a rope. Cus took Mike in, not just as a fighter, as a son, gave him a room, gave him rules. Wake up at 5, train, study. Cus made Mike read philosophy, history, strategy, told him, "You're going to be heavyweight champion of the world." And Mike, this kid, who'd never been told he was worth anything, heard those words, and felt something he'd never felt before, hope, and more than that, love. Cus D'Amato loved Mike Tyson unconditionally, and for the first time in his life, Mike Tyson felt safe. Felt like maybe he wasn't just some throwaway kid from the ghetto. Maybe he was someone. But Cus died, November 4th, pneumonia. Mike was 19, about to become champion, and the one man who loved him unconditionally was gone. Tyson won the heavyweight title 13 months later, 20 years old. Youngest heavyweight champion in history. But inside he was still that abandoned kid. And now his father figure was dead. Cus never saw him become champion, and Tyson carried that loss like a stone in his chest. The pattern was set. Everyone I love dies. Everyone I need abandons me. Nothing I achieve will ever fill this hole. Every relationship after Cus Tyson approached with the same terror. His first marriage to Robin Givens in 1988. A disaster. She took him on national television, on Barbara Walters' show, with Mike sitting next to her, and told the world he was volatile, scary, manic depressive. Told Barbara, "My life is torture." And Mike sat there, frozen, humiliated. They divorced within a year. She got millions. He got a deeper confirmation that he was unlovable. Then Don King, the promoter, positioned himself as a father figure, called Mike son, told him, "I'll take care of you." Don King stole over $100 million from Mike Tyson, forged contracts, shell company. By the time Mike figured it out, the money was gone. Another abandonment. Another betrayal. Another betrayal. Another confirmation that anyone who claimed to love him was lying. By 2003, Mike Tyson declared bankruptcy. $300 million earned. Gone. $23 million in debt. The mansions. Repossessed. The entourage vanished. Mike moved into a small rental in Phoenix. No staff. No trainers. Just him and the silence. And in that silence, he had to face something terrifying. Without the belt. Without the fame. Without the money. Without Iron Mike. Who was he? He didn't have an answer. The bankruptcy wasn't just financial, it was existential. Mike's entire identity had been built on being powerful, being feared, being the baddest man on the planet. But when the money ran out, the mask cracked. People who claimed to love him disappeared, and Mike was forced to see the truth. They never loved him. They loved what he represented. And Mike didn't know himself. He'd spent so long being Iron Mike that he forgot Michael ever existed. By 2009, Tyson was trying to rebuild. Small acting roles, public appearances, anything to make money. That's how he ended up in Tokyo in November. A promotional tour, a week of appearances, media interviews, photo ops. They'd pay him well. Tyson said yes. He needed the money, but more than that, he needed to stay busy. Because staying busy meant not thinking, not feeling. And Mike Tyson had a lot he didn't want to feel. Especially after May, especially after Exodus. 3 months after burying his 4-year-old daughter, Mike Tyson got on a plane to Tokyo. He told himself he was fine. But he wasn't. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since Exodus died. When he did sleep, he had nightmares. Saw her face. Woke up reaching for her and remembered she was gone. During the day, he moved through the world like he was underwater. Everything muffled, distant, unreal. He'd be mid-conversation and forget where he was. Tokyo. You're in Tokyo. For work. Keep moving. Don't stop. If you stop, you'll break. The first few days in Tokyo, Tyson kept it together, showed up, smiled for cameras, signed autographs, told the stories people wanted to hear. He left out the parts about bankruptcy, addiction, his daughter dying 3 months ago. That's not what they paid for. They paid for Iron Mike. So that's what he gave them. But the performance was getting harder. Each smile felt like it was cracking his face. He was there, but he wasn't there. And the gap between who he was supposed to be and who he actually was, that gap was widening, becoming a chasm. November 19, 2009, the breaking point. Tyson had just finished a media appearance in Shibuya. Big event. Lots of press. Cameras everywhere. The same questions over and over. He answered them all. Professional, polished. But inside he was screaming. The event ended. His handlers said the car would be there in 30 minutes. Tyson said he'd walk, needed air. So they let him go, and Mike Tyson walked out into the Tokyo night. Alone. It was almost midnight. But Shibuya was alive. Neon signs humming, music spilling from clubs. The famous crossing. Hundreds of people flooding across when the light changed. Tyson joined them, just another body in the crowd. Nobody recognized him, and Tyson walked, heading toward his hotel, not thinking, just moving. But somewhere along the way, maybe 10 minutes in, something shifted. His chest got tight. His breathing got short, sharp. He tried to calm himself, but it wasn't working. The panic attack he'd been holding at bay for weeks was here. The crowd started to feel wrong. Too close. Too many bodies. The neon lights. Too bright. The sounds blurred into static. He couldn't focus. Couldn't orient himself. He looked around and saw nothing familiar. Just faces he didn't know. Buildings he'd never seen. Signs in a language he couldn't read. And Mike Tyson, who'd traveled the world, who'd fought in front of millions, felt completely lost. He needed to stop. Needed something solid. There was a concrete wall and he reached for it, put his hand on it, tried to anchor himself. But his legs buckled. He slid down the wall, and the baddest man on the planet ended up sitting on a Tokyo curb, trying to remember how to breathe. And then the grief hit. Not the manageable kind, the kind that's been buried for months and finally breaks through. Tears came, fast and hot, and unstoppable. Not angry tears, the tears of a father who lost his daughter, the tears of a man who'd been abandoned his whole life and was sitting alone in a foreign country, invisible despite being one of the most famous people on earth. His shoulders shook. His massive hands covered his tattooed face. And Mike Tyson really cried, the kind that empties you out. He cried for Exodus, for his baby girl who loved when he read to her, who climbed into his lap, and made him feel like maybe he was good at something that mattered. He cried for Cos, dead 24 years but still the only father he'd ever known. He cried for his mother, who died when he was 16, who loved him but couldn't protect him. He cried for the boy from Brownsville who just wanted to be safe, to be loved, and instead learned to hurt people, became a weapon. He cried for all the years he spent pretending to be Iron Mike, when he just wanted to be Michael, for all the masks he wore until he forgot his real face. And he cried because he was tired, so tired of fighting, of pretending, of being strong, of being Mike Tyson. People walked past. Some glanced, most didn't. The elderly woman stopped, looked at him, started to step closer, but then she saw his size, his face tattoo, and walked away. And Mike Tyson, 43 years old, former heavyweight champion, sat on that street crying alone for almost 10 minutes, completely invisible. And in that invisibility, he understood something. He'd spent his entire life trying to be seen, trying to be feared, respected, famous, powerful, and now, in his moment of absolute vulnerability, he was unseen, and he realized, all that fame, all that power, it never filled the hole, never healed the wound. The abandoned boy from Brownsville was still there, still alone, still terrified, still waiting for someone to save him, but nobody was coming, except himself. He'd later tell his therapist and Joe Rogan, that night in Tokyo, I realized I'd won everything: championships, money, fame, respect, fear, all of it. And I'd lost myself. I didn't know who Mike Tyson was without the boxing, without the image, without the rage. And sitting on that street, I was forced to meet him, the real him, and I didn't like what I found. A scared, hurt, angry man who'd never dealt with his pain, who just punched it into other people, and now there was nobody left to punch, just me, just the mirror. Eventually, Tyson stood up, wiped his face, walked back to his hotel, got to his room, and just stood there. Then he walked to the window, sat in the chair, stared out at Tokyo, and watched the city wake up. As the sun rose, he didn't sleep, didn't eat, just sat, and somewhere in those hours, a thought came: I can't do this anymore. Can't pretend, can't perform, can't be Iron Mike. And if I keep pretending, I'm going to die. Not metaphorically, actually die, because the gap between who I'm supposed to be and who I actually am, it's killing me. The next morning, Tyson's manager found him still sitting by the window, still in yesterday's clothes. Mike, we've got interviews at 9, you ready? Tyson didn't look at him. Cancel them. What, Mike? We can't. Cancel them, all of them. Mike, there are contracts. Tyson's voice, quiet but final. I can't do this anymore. Cancel everything. And he meant it. For the next 3 days, Tyson cancelled every appearance. His team panicked. Sponsors threatened lawsuits. The Japanese press called him unprofessional, unreliable. Tyson didn't care. He was too busy trying to figure out how to stay alive. Because the truth was, after that breakdown, he was thinking about ending it. Not with a plan, but the thought was there. What's the point? I can't protect anyone. Everyone I love dies or leaves. I've destroyed my legacy. I'm broke. I'm alone. My daughter's dead. What am I even doing? These weren't new thoughts. Tyson had been suicidal before, after prison in 1992, after bankruptcy in 2003. But this time felt different, because this time, he wasn't angry, and anger had always saved him. Anger gave him fuel, direction, an enemy to fight. But now, just emptiness. And emptiness is more dangerous than rage. But 3 days into his isolation, Mike Tyson made a phone call that saved his life. He called Dr. Marilyn Murray, a therapist he'd worked with briefly in 1994. Then fired. He'd screamed at her, I don't need you to fix me. I'm not broken. I'm Mike Tyson. She'd told him gently, Mike, being strong doesn't mean you can't ask for help. He walked out, didn't speak to her for 15 years. But now, sitting in that Tokyo hotel room, he looked up her number. His hands shook. As he dialed, she answered, This is Dr. Murray.
His voice cracked. Dr. Murray. This is Mike Tyson. Long pause. Mike, it's good to hear from you. And Mike Tyson broke again. Dr. Murray. I think I was wrong. I think I am broken, and I don't know how to fix it, and I'm scared. That phone call lasted 2 hours. He told her everything about Exodus, the funeral, the sleepless nights, the Tokyo street, the panic attacks, the suicidal thoughts, about feeling like he'd wasted his whole life, being someone he wasn't. And Dr. Murray listened, didn't judge, didn't give easy answers, just listened. And when he was done, she said, Mike, you're not broken, you're human, and you've been in pain your entire life. But pain doesn't mean you're defective. It means you've survived things most people couldn't imagine. You're incredibly strong, but strength doesn't mean never falling apart. It means getting back up. And now, you have a choice. You can keep running from yourself, keep performing until it kills you, or you can start the hardest fight of your life, the fight to become whole. Tyson was silent. Then he asked, how do I do that? And Dr. Murray said, one day at a time, and it starts with being honest, with me, with yourself, with the people you love. No more performing, no more Iron Mike, just truth, just Michael. Can you do that? Tyson thought about it, how hard that would be, how scary, and then he said, I can try. Dr. Murray said, that's all any of us can do, try, and when you fail, try again. That's the fight. Tyson flew back to the United States a week later, cancelled the rest of Tokyo, paid the penalties, didn't care, just went home, and for the first time in years, he started actually dealing with his pain, started therapy with Dr. Murray. Twice a week, real therapy, the kind that hurts, because you're touching the wounds. They talked about being abandoned at 2, about Brownsville, about boxing giving him identity, but also trapping him, about fame being a cage, about his marriages, his failures as a father, his addiction, his rage, and about Exodus. They spent months on Exodus, on the grief, on the guilt. If I'd been there, if I'd been a better father. And Dr. Murray helped him see some things aren't your fault, some things you can't control. The only choice you have is how you carry them. 6 months after Tokyo, in May 2010, on what would have been Exodus's 6th birthday, Tyson did something he hadn't done since he was a kid. He went back to Brooklyn, back to Brownsville. He walked the streets, saw the building where he grew up, saw the roof where he used to keep pigeons. That roof, those pigeons, that was before everything, before boxing, before fame, when he was just a scared, lonely kid who found peace with birds. Pigeons didn't judge him, didn't want anything, they just were, and with them, he could just be. He climbed those stairs. The pigeon coop was abandoned, falling apart, but Tyson stood there for an hour, just remembering the boy he used to be, before he had to become a weapon. And standing there, Mike Tyson made a decision. He bought the building, restored the pigeon coop, and he started spending time there, almost daily, feeding the bird, sitting in silence, learning how to be Mike again, not Iron Mike, just Mike. 2 years after Tokyo, in 2011, Tyson launched a one-man show called Undisputed Truth, not a victory lap, an honest, brutal examination of his life. He talked about everything: the rape conviction, the Holyfield bite, the drug addiction, the bankruptcy, being a terrible husband, an absent father, and Tokyo. He told the Tokyo story on stage, about sitting on that curb, crying, invisible, broken, and he said, I was chasing money, fame, respect, power. I wanted to be the baddest man on the planet, and I was, but I forgot to chase peace. And that night, sitting on that street in Tokyo, alone, I realized, the fight isn't in the ring, it's here. He touched his chest, and I'd been losing that fight my whole life, so I had a choice: keep fighting everyone else, or start fighting for myself. I chose me. For the first time in my life, I chose me. The show ran for 2 years, thousands of people saw it, and something unexpected happened. People came up to him after, crying, thanking him, not for his boxing, for his honesty, for admitting he was broke, for showing that even the toughest man alive needed help. One father came up to him, tears streaming, my daughter died last year, car accident, and I've been holding it in, trying to be strong, but hearing you talk about Exodus, about breaking down, it gave me permission to cry. Thank you. And Tyson hugged him. This stranger held him while he cried, and Tyson cried too, and he realized, maybe the Tokyo breakdown wasn't just his rock bottom. Maybe it was the beginning of something bigger, a different kind of strength, the strength to be vulnerable, to show your scars and say, this is me, this is what I've survived. Today, Mike Tyson is 58 years old. He's sober, has been since 2010. He still goes to therapy, still works on himself. Trauma doesn't disappear. The demons don't go away, but he knows their names now. He's a father to 6 living children, and he's present, shows up, takes their calls, apologizes when he screws up. He's married to Lakiha Spicer, and it's the healthiest relationship of his life. He hosts a podcast, Hotboxin' with Mike Tyson, and he talks openly about mental health, therapy, trauma, crying, asking for help, things he would have called weak 20 years ago. Now he calls them survival, and people listen. Millions, young men, fighters, people who grew up thinking vulnerability was weakness, and they hear Mike Tyson say, I needed help, therapy saved my life, and they think, maybe I can ask for help too. And every year on Exodus's birthday, Mike Tyson visits her grave, alone, no cameras, just him and his daughter. He brings flowers, sits next to her headstone, and he reads to her Dr. Seuss, her favorites. He told Joe Rogan, she loved when I read to her. I wasn't good at it, but she'd sit in my lap and listen like I was telling her the secrets of the universe. So I still read to her. I don't know if she hears me, but I hear me, and I remember what I'm living for, why I'm still here, why I chose to stay. When Rogan asked what he learned from that Tokyo night, Tyson was quiet. Then he said, I learned that rock bottom has a basement, that you can always fall further. But I also learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing you can do. I spent my whole life punishing myself for things I couldn't control, but with Exodus, I learned, some things aren't about you. The universe doesn't punish, it just is, and all you can do is love the people you have while you have them. Be present, because tomorrow's not promised, and when they're gone, all you have are the moments, so make good ones. And when it hurts, when the grief comes, don't run, feel it, let it move through you, because grief is love, with nowhere to go, and that's beautiful, painful, but beautiful. Mike Tyson has become a mental health advocate, without calling himself one. He just talks, honestly, about being suicidal, about therapy, about the days when getting out of bed feels impossible, about the fight to stay sober, and young fighters listen. Young men, especially black men who've been told their whole lives to be hard, to never show weakness, they listen, because if Mike Tyson can admit he needed help, if the baddest man on the planet can say therapy saved his life, then maybe they can too. Maybe vulnerability isn't weakness. Maybe the real fight isn't in the ring. Maybe it's in the mirror. That night in Tokyo, sitting on that curb, crying alone while the world walked by, Mike Tyson could have given up, could have let the darkness win, and no one would have blamed him. Losing a child, that's a grief that doesn't, it just becomes part of you, a scar that never fully heals. But instead of giving up, Mike Tyson did something harder. He admitted he was broken. He asked for help. He started the longest, hardest fight of his life, the fight to become whole, not perfect, not healed, whole, which means accepting the broken parts, carrying the scars, living with the pain, but not letting them define you, letting them change you instead. Mike Tyson is still fighting that fight, every single day. The demons are still there. Trauma doesn't disappear. The abandoned boy from Brownsville still lives inside him, but now, Mike knows his name, talks to him, takes care of him, and every day he makes a choice. He chooses not to let the darkness win. He chooses to get up, to feed his pigeons, to call his kids, to show up to therapy, to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be human. That's not weakness. That's the real fight, the one that takes a lifetime, the one nobody sees, the one where you face the mirror, face the void, face the grief, face yourself, and say, I'm still here, I'm still standing, I'm still trying. And that's enough. That's the knockout that matters, not the ones in the ring, the ones in your head, the ones in your heart, the fight against yourself, for yourself. And Mike Tyson is still in the ring, battered, scarred, but standing. And that's the fight worth watching. That's the victory worth celebrating.